Hey everybody, happy Monday. Hope you're having a great start to your week. Today is day 4 of our talk series with Coach Julia Seal on behaviors that create toxic conflict in relationships. This is our 4th video. The first one was on criticism, then we looked at defensiveness. Yesterday we looked at stonewalling, and today we're going to be talking about contempt and how this behavior increases conflict and damages our relationship. And I see Julia's here. All right, let's bring you up. It's always fun to do these calls. I love it. Hey there. Good morning.
Hi
Good
there.
afternoon. Hi.
Yay. Can you believe we've been at this for 4 days?
I
Amazing.
know. I like it. I like it a lot. I actually think that we need to think about doing some different talk series like this with the topic of focus. It's really interesting, and I've been getting so much great feedback from people about what they're learning and all the deep kind of reflections that it's bringing up for people as they look at their relationships in their lives and see from the very skillful perspective that you share these 4 behaviors that really contribute to toxic conflict, which was great that yesterday you clarified for us. Not conflict. Conflict itself is not necessarily toxic. It's when it becomes toxic that's a problem, and that's really what this whole talk series is focused on. So I'm excited, and I'm excited about today's topic, not because I like it, but because I think there's a lot to learn about it, which, today we're going to talk about contempt, right?
Yeah, this is I think this is one that none of us like, right? Contempt and we definitely think that we don't do it.
Yeah. I think it would be good to start today because I don't know, for those of you that are listening, watching live, or catching the replay, when you think of the word contempt, what does it mean for you? How does it feel for you? But I'd love, Julie, for you to explain in a very, simple way what is contempt.
Okay, so if we think of it at its worst, maybe, things like belittling someone, sarcasm, cynicism,
Mm-hmm.
name calling, kind of being a bit belligerent.
Mm-hmm.
And then another one, which we might actually see quite a lot of, but not realize that it's contempt, is hostile humor.
Interesting. Okay. All of those, just you listing those, I feel them, and these are heavy, not fun things to have in a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why this is really considered the most poisonous of all the poisons. And
Mm,
it is usually kind of what happens if we haven't addressed the other ones in the course of the relationship. This is where it gets to. So when you start having contempt, and this is one-on-one, right?
right.
Between the two of you. Once you start experiencing contempt, or once you're feeling contemptuous towards another person, that person, and you're expressing it, there's quite a lot of damage that's already been done there. So if you think in a partnership, a business partnership or a marriage partnership, if contempt shows up, it's really showing like a long-term erosion of the relationship through all the other toxic behaviors, really.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's going on behind the scenes if we've gotten to that point where either we're, giving contempt in one way or another with those behaviors, or if someone else is sending that our way, what's really happened on the inside that makes that show up?
Yeah, and it is interesting because I want us to just think carefully about this as it being an interaction between the two of us, because we do see this contemptuous type behavior out in the public quite a lot. And
Sure.
sometimes even in families, when people are sniping about someone else behind their back, what we're talking about here is it's kind of direct.
Gotcha.
So, or it's within your earshot, right? So kind of hostile humor within your earshot. You see that a lot in business. But
Mm,
what's going on if you're in another room and it's happening? I mean, it's still just growing the other person's contempt the more that they keep saying that, but you're not actually experiencing it. So be aware that in the office, there's actually a lot of contempt flying around in the office environment, less
Yeah.
in a marriage partnership or a business partnership, and also quite a lot in families. But then in families, it's often done in another room. So what's really underneath it, Jamie? It's not very nice. It just is a way of conveying disgust and basically condescension.
Yeah.
So it's almost like someone has decided and is feeling contemptuous about another person and is really not seeing them as an equal human being in their eyes.
So there's a loss of respect, a disconnection with even seeing the humanity in some ways of the other person.
100%, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's so easy if you see how contemptuous behaviors can happen in public, right? Because we've got all these belief systems about certain types of people or
Yeah.
certain race groups, or women are all like this or men are all like this. And there's a contemptuousness in the belief systems that run often very quietly below the surface of what's going on with us. And so that's what often shows up in the office environment. But in a family, it's fueled by really long-term misunderstandings and long-term not clear communications that are just built up and built up. So this is like the escalated, and it can be it might not even be hot, right? Like in the others, like anxiety and blame and criticism can be very hot conflict. This can be very cold conflict from the one side. But just like you say, I just have to say the word like sarcasm and belittling, and we all get that feeling,
Yeah.
right?
Because we've experienced it, and we've probably dealt it too at one point or another.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, it's
Well,
very nice.
think of kids and name calling, right? And that kind of bullying shows up even in adult relationships. Well, in grown up relationships, but they might not be adult relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I have two kind of questions or ways I think we could go with this, and I'm super happy for you to choose what feels like the right next step. But one, I'm thinking, if you feel like, if you're listening or watching this and you feel like, oh yeah, I do that stuff, I think it'd be interesting to talk about how we can begin to become more aware of that in ourselves and kind of draw back from it. But then the other side would be, if you're in a relationship or you have someone in your family, you're going to see them soon over the holidays, and there's this dynamic of contempt that you are on the receiving side. Maybe you deal it back as well. How can people also deal with that, in dynamic with someone else? So whichever way you'd like to go.
Yeah, either way. And actually, I thought I'd start by referring back to something we spoke about yesterday about there's always two protagonists in conflict, right? There's a victim and a persecutor. And like blame and criticism is the opposite side of defensiveness, there's always a victim and a persecutor. So again, you're seeing that play, victim persecutor. So what we're always trying to do, whether you identify as the victim or the persecutor, and it takes a lot for us to identify as the persecutor.
Yeah.
Right? We will always, even if we are perceived to be doing the persecuting, we will turn it around and make ourselves the victim. So it's quite fascinating how we do that. But so remember that what we're trying to get out of in the hot conflict situation is this duality of role, victim, persecutor. You have to step out of that because and so these little tips and tricks are giving you that tiny bit of pause in order for you to step out of that. And that actually, the theory behind that comes from, something that was developed in in the 1960s, called the victim triangle. And it was a way of understanding what goes on in conflict. And this is very interesting in families because it's a triangle, right? So you have victim and persecutor, But in the triangle, you also have rescuer. And so there's an interplay. So if, for example, in your family, you're always trying to get involved between two people to calm the conflict down, or don't be so mean to so and so, or shouldn't, you're actually part of the conflict, and you are actually escalating the conflict because you're not allowing the clarity of communication to happen between the victim and the persecutor, which sometimes has to break down before we can fix it again. So the rescuer thinks they're doing an amazing job, and lots of us are rescuers. Sure. And wanting to save the victim, and actually we're not helping. So we, another way for, to get out of that as the rescuer is to stop getting involved, right? Just be the witness. And then, because none of these little tips I'm giving you is your role. These are tips either for the victim or the persecutor, if that makes sense. But it's a very interesting tool to look at yourself and where are you and what are you doing in one of those three roles. Because even if you see yourself out of that, especially in the family, are you actually playing a role as some kind of enabler, some kind of rescuer?
Yeah, that's interesting. And in any given conflict, can we shift positions depending on how the conflict is going?
Oh, yeah. And, the thing is, because we're talking about issues of power, someone who is feeling victimized will often lash out, right, to try and take the persecutor role. That's why it's an ongoing thing. It never resolves. So if you're big enough to, all of us, to admit that maybe sometimes we are contemptuous of others, it's a big thing to admit. So take a deep breath if you're there. And, I think a little pat on the back, if any of you listening are going, sometimes I do use hostile humor, and sometimes I name call someone, even if it's in another room, right? So you're telling your mum about something that your sister-in-law said or something, be aware that all just is part of it. But if you're doing it and you notice that you're doing it, stop it. Just stop immediately. So as soon as you become aware of that sort of sarcastic voice, that kind of slightly snarky way of talking to somebody, stop. Because you are headed down a one-way route of hot conflict and a broken relationship. That's really important for long-term marriages and partnerships. We get to often say stuff to each other thinking, because you've been together for 20 years and this is the way we've always been. And you sometimes listen to how old married couples talk. It's not very nice.
Sometimes that's true, yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that's really important to remember, and this is interesting because often when you are in that sort of persecutor role, is think about respect, because what it is lack of respect. And someone who's standing in that role actually is coming from the position that respect is earned. So that person that I think these things about needs to earn my respect, needs to do these things for me to be able to respect them again. And we need to remember that respect isn't earned, respect is given. So they don't have to earn our respect. They give us their respect. Actually, when possibly we've earned it in a way, but it's better to think of it as it's something that is freely given. And so what you want to be doing is stop and kind of like stop and admit, right? And sort of keep going, take that back step, and then try to go back to what we're talking about in the other three sessions is clarity. What are you really trying to say? And can you say it without the personal attack? Remembering if the conflict's already hot, that person is going to hear an attack even if there isn't one.
Right. So empathy
So
is so important, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, because you've got to remember that the other person is now, you know, they're triggered possibly, and their little hackles are up, and so they're going to be hearing everything as criticism, and they're going to be going back into defensiveness themselves,
Right.
or lashing back. So, you know, to keep really stopping yourself and then tapping in when you can in a reflective moment. If you do have someone in your family, especially ahead of the holidays, in a reflective moment, someone you don't like, ask yourself, can you see their humanity?
Yeah.
Is there anything about them that you might like or respect? Because when we go into our, you know, our family dinners and things, there's always like, oh, you know, old uncle so-and-so, or my brother's such a racist, or my sister's this. There you are, you're in contempt, right? And that's why I say we all do it, even though it sounds so awful. So really see, and it needs to be in a reflective moment. It's hard to do it in the moment. The other person's greatness, right? Find something about them that is amazing, so that softens you. And like we said in the other
That's
sessions,
nice.
the minute you can soften something, the heat softens down in conflict.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for how, I'm sure anyone listening that identifies with that situation probably just had a face and name came to mind. And then when you said find their greatness, probably was like, ah. Do you have any tips or guidance on, you know, if there is that strained relationship with some elements of contempt in it, how can a person begin to see that greatness when maybe they feel a little bit blocked or resistant about that in that relationship?
Mm. Yeah, and like I said, it needs to be in a reflective moment, right? So not in the midst of everything. But the Dalai Lama gave advice once on how to do this. And he said, just picture going through their life one day as if you were them.
Mm.
Try and see through their eyes, their life through their eyes. And there'll be something there that creates a tiny spark of empathy or compassion, or a little bit of your history together, that there was a happy memory, something you'll find. And then you hold on to that feeling. And I thought that was quite nice. You know, that's quite nice advice, because the minute we can put ourselves into someone else's shoes, no matter how much we don't like them, I don't know about you, but I almost get a rush of affection for that person,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, because you feel both the empathy and the compassion coming together of, okay, there's something divine in all of us. If we can just peel back the layers of our conditioning or judgment or complicated emotions and connect with that in every single person. So I think that's a beautiful thing. That's cool that the Dalai Lama said that. It's pretty wise.
Yeah, well, we know he's wise. And listen, he's the embodiment of compassion on this earth, so he should know this better than any of us, right?
Yeah, true, true. That's really
But
good advice.
yeah,
Good. For
but
those of you, oh, I was
yeah,
just going to say, for anyone watching live, if you have any questions, throw them in the comments, or if you're catching the replay, leave them as well. We'll come back to them, because this is an interesting topic, and I feel like contempt. You know, among the four things we've looked at, we did criticism and blame, defensiveness. Yesterday was about stonewalling, or that kind of cold shoulder, shutting down and not refusing to
mm,
engage, and then today contempt. These are all things that all of us do at one point or another. I want to repeat that, because yesterday at a lunch talk, some friends were asking me, what have you been talking about in these lives? I saw one of them. I want to watch the rest. They're really interesting. And somebody said, oh no, well, I definitely do stonewalling. then to my husband, and he's across the table from her. And she looks at him and she's like, what happens if we don't, move through this? And I could tell she was really judging herself. And I said, Emily, it's okay. Oh, I shouldn't have said it. I said to my friend, it's okay. We all do these things. Sometimes the idea is to be aware and not to judge ourselves harshly for it, but just to see it and move through it. So I wanted to point that out because these are not weapons to hurt one another with, nor weapons to hurt ourselves with in terms of judging, but just really a level of kind of awareness and vocabulary to start to think, right, how to move through them and become more whole and improve those relationships. So I wanted to point that out a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice point that you make. And I do want to get back to what to do if you're experiencing it so that people who are listening can tap into that. But I think what you say is really lovely because we are so good to take anything that we learn from the sort of coaching world or the world of personal development and use it against ourselves. I remembered my first foray when I was walking the dog just now, and I remember my first foray into personal development, self-help field was a book that I found somewhere, I don't know where, called Your Erroneous Zones. And I found it at like age 13, right? And it sounds like your erogenous zone. So I remember my mom looking at it like, what? And then I think I realized now what a terrible book that I started out with, because, it was more like, well, what's wrong with me that I need to fix? And so much of my journey and my own journey has been about like, oh, I become aware of these things. Now I need to stop it because it makes me a bad person and I could be better than. And I really just almost want to say that the whole point of whole being happiness, which I'm passionate about, is the loving of yourself for everything. So yes, we can get better, especially in our relationships, because that's a fabulous place for growth. And we can be kinder and more compassionate and more gentle in the world. We can. But we need to be that with ourselves and to not, like Jamie says, using this as weapons, either against ourselves or even against the other. Because if you start picking up that your partner's using stonewalling, for example, and now you say to them, hey, stop stonewalling, you always stonewall, well, then you're into criticism yourself.
It's a very good point.
You're name calling, right? Which is what we're trying to get from.
Yeah, it's like same game, new players. You're just following the same patterns, but with new tools.
Yeah. So what to do if you experience contempt?
Yeah.
So like you said, again, with we can all feel what name calling is like, what it feels like. We get that like whack in our stomachs, in our hearts, in our breath. Again, with all the toxic behaviors, the first thing is the awareness that what our body and our brain has filtered those words, and we've let them inside ourselves, and they are having an impact on our physical body. So feel that. Notice your impact.
Yeah.
Right. Then again, you need to breathe. Always breath, because you are trying again to step out of the automatic reactive mode and to step into skillful responsive mode. And so the skillful response here is when someone says something that's contemptuous, is to ask for clarity. And a great question there is to say, can you tell me a little bit more about your intention with what you just said? Because it goes what's underneath the words, and it's an immediate question to the other person who suddenly goes, it's quite interesting to watch it in action, right? Because it's almost like they get a wake-up call.
Right.
Maybe I didn't say that well.
Sure.
Or maybe my horrible, ugly belief system is showing through in my words. It's a very powerful very powerful question,
Yeah.
gently. Don't shout it at them. It's a gentle question. So what was your intention? And then it can be useful, depending on the relationship, is to express your feeling and then your willingness to dig deeper and resolve what's going on. If it's a very contemptuous relationship,
Mm-hmm.
expressing your feeling, it might be too hot. Like I'm feeling belittled right now, could increase the other person's contempt because, you know, they will perceive that you are playing the victim role.
Mm.
So if need be, you want to take a step out for 5 minutes to just manage your own feelings before even expressing them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we in a relationship, a close relationship, we often make the mistake of, and it comes from the self-help industry, right, of just expressing our feelings and expecting the other person to care. So we almost vomit out our feelings because now we want the other person to take responsibility to help us feel better because it was their fault that I'm feeling these things.
Yeah.
So when you're expressing your feelings, it is really good to be doing it from a place of responsive mode where it's not in the middle of the hot conflict. So if you're in the middle of the really hot conflict, you're going to use a question of, maybe you could tell me a little bit more about your intention with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Once it's downscaled a little bit and you're wanting to dig underneath it, then you're going to start using like, oh, that felt, when you said that, it felt really sore when you said that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that's not what you meant. What did you mean?
Yeah. I can see how that would be quite disarming because it gives the person a moment themselves to respond, to pause and respond. What did you mean by that? Oh. Oh. And it takes some of the sting out of it because I also can imagine, and I myself have had moments where I felt contemptuous. You say it and you know it's going to hurt. So when the person doesn't come back with another criticism or defensiveness, it disarms the conflict. It takes some of the heat out of it. And I can see how powerful that is.
And that's really what we're trying to do, right? Is in with this series of the four talks, is to look at, you know, the kinds of the behaviors that escalate conflict, that make it hotter, and that then, you know, that are destructive in the long run. And we're looking at very simple actions to cool it down.
Mm-hmm.
But what will ultimately resolve things is to be able to have a conversation when both of you are in a more responsive, less triggered state. And the encouragement really is to have those conversations because we don't really want to. So that's why we're so good at putting stuff under the carpet until it flares up again. And then that is why it's never resolved. And that is why, like I said yesterday, the love in the family, the love in a group, the love and connectedness in a team actually weakens.
Mm.
It kind of gets hard and brittle as opposed to being warm and open if you never look at these things. But there's also a whole different type of family where they want to put everything out in the open too.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that is, you know, that's where I want to warn people of, again, this thing about sovereignty over your own emotions. It is not for your family members to make you feel better. You know, it is really about owning our own emotions and not blaming so-and-so for how they make you feel.
Yeah.
You know, so that's really the most important thing. And that is I mean, all of this conflict and this hot conflict is about like skills that we didn't get, right, when we were growing up, and we certainly didn't learn them at school. And so really this is what coaching is trying to do, is to tackle it at its core, okay, which is emotional ownership or emotional adulthood or EQ or all of these nice words that they've now thrown at it now, or, you know, emotional whole being is the one that I love. But it is about our emotional life is ours and no one else is actually responsible for that.
That's so important, isn't it? Because that way you can take the actions that you need to take, or just build the awareness that you need to build to feel what you want to feel, and not be so feeling pulled around, reacting to the conditions around us, external to us.
Yeah, and we're taught, I mean, think about this message that we get on the playground. Oh, you mustn't make little Johnny sad. You mustn't make him cry.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, so it's totally putting out, like, we are socialized totally into that our emotional well-being belongs in the hands of others. And this is why a lot of this relationship work, no matter whether it's hot conflict or whether it is, you know, just the dynamic within a team, a lot of this relationship work is deep inner work, right? It's relationship to yourself. Because I can tell you, if you're name calling people out there, you're pretty much doing it inside.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it all ends up looking at you and the relationship that you have with yourself, your current self, your past self, and your future self, and how you think about her in all those forms, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm already imagining in my mind's eye how incredible it's going to be to spend 8 weeks with you, going deep. And, you know, we've done these talks and they've been really profound, at just half an hour a day to go into 4 different of these toxic kind of behaviors. But I'm just imagining how amazing it will be to go once a week with you, into topics we're actually guiding us how to apply these in real time to relationships that we have. You know, we're anticipating the holidays coming up, maybe with our romantic partner or our children or whoever's, you know, in our daily lives as well. Things come up, and to have you there to help people work through some of these things in real time and reflect and take that kind of observer, distant role to more consciously come back and respond. I think that is so incredible, and I want you to, in a minute, you can share a little bit about what that program is going to be like. But I think that's amazing. And for those of you that are just joining us, this is our 4th of 4 conversations around toxic behaviors that create and escalate conflict. And we're doing these talks as a build up to a group coaching program that starts this Wednesday, December 8th, around relationships and building capacity really to get rid of some of these toxic behaviors, have more authentic and loving and light and living connections, not the dry and brittle. And Julia is the coach that's going to be leading that. And if you don't know about Julia yet, I can't imagine how, but she's an ICF certified coach. ICF is kind of the gold standard in the coaching industry. And we're creating this kind of offering together with Lemon Rebellion to help women come together to look at those relationships and begin to change just that needle, that compass direction a little bit, to get on a path where these relationships can become more fulfilling and loving and peaceful and satisfying now and in the future. So tell us a little bit about
Amy. I mean, come on, we've got a healthy conflict.
Okay, healthy conflict is good. Well, you see, I need coaching because I keep blocking that, because I think I probably subconsciously believe that all conflict is to be avoided. So that, for instance, would be a topic to kind of bring up and work through in a coaching session, like, you know, like the program that's coming up.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I said yesterday, I put the word conflict on my social media in red text, you know, and everyone was like, yes, conflict, terrible, awful. And it's like, how can you not have conflict unless the other person is just constantly agreeing with you, and then are they being their authentic selves? You know, and so you know, I think it's so exciting when you can have conflict and not be triggered that it's terrifying, right? And that you're basically, that you go into that automatic freeze flight state, because conflict's awful, right? So if you're thinking conflict's awful and it shouldn't be in a relationship, then how do you show up like that, right? You're going to be in that. But so the whole thing of coaching is to get you out of that, that get you out of that thinking that it's a really bad thing, but then also into what are the healthy ways of having
Exactly.
conflict
Yeah.
and conversation. And, you know, I think what's really exciting, and I'm glad that people have found these 4 days helpful, because it is actually the thinnest level of support that I can give you, because we're talking about little actions to take.
Mm-hmm.
What's really, really powerful, and this is where coaching can be transformative, is when we start to coach on the emotional level, right? Like we talked about emotional whole being and emotional maturity, EQ,
Mm-hmm.
and then also coaching at that, like in your belief systems.
Yeah.
And
Right.
what's going on there, and what's going on in, you know, in your whole kind of think, feel, act cycle that is
Right.
your inner wiring. That's where the coaching is really exciting. So if these little tips help you in your conflict, then I can promise you coaching is going to be profoundly more than that, and more fun, right? Because you're going to feel way more empowered
Right.
to try
Right.
these things. You know, at the moment, you're probably thinking, oh, Julia, you know, like, oh, contempt comes my way and she wants me to say, well, so what's your intention about that? You're thinking, well, that's never going to work, you stupid woman. And I'm like, but I think that's what's so exciting, is that, you know, if you, these little tips and tricks help,
Yeah.
it is extraordinary what coaching does on top of that when we coach
Yeah.
at a, you know, at a deeper level. And that's what's exciting, and that's what's exciting to spend 8 weeks together doing,
Yeah.
because we work at all levels, right?
Right.
And, you know, even the, you know, we work with the relationship with yourself profoundly, because that's then how you show up in any situation. And that's a matter of inner power and holding our inner power, because many of us are very powerful inside in many relationships. Okay, and then there's one where we go to
Yeah.
pieces.
Mm-hmm. It's
And it's
true. Isn't
often
that so true? Yeah. And it's not that we don't necessarily have some of the tools, but that in some relationships, for whatever reason, it falls apart and it eludes us how to manage it better. So that's incredible. I'm really excited about what's going to come from this program, and I can't believe it only starts in 2 days. We have just a few spots left, so we're going to leave that. The link is both in my bio and on Julia's page there on Instagram. You can get to it from her webpage. And we were talking about how people have more questions and want to contact you directly to ask you some things about the program. Maybe they're interested, but they're like, what is group coaching? How's it going to work? How can they get in touch with you for that if they have questions?
Okay, so if you want to join the group program that's starting on Wednesday, then I would suggest jumping on a call with me right now, either today or tomorrow is Tuesday. So we've got all of Tuesday and Wednesday to chat if you want to talk about that specifically. So that's really easy. You could either, in Jamie's bio, there's a link there, or you can go to my website, which is Happiness-Matters.coach. And there's a bright little yellow jigsaw puzzle piece that says Coach with Julia. And then you can book a discovery call with me. And then we can talk about the relationships and if the group coaching is right for you, or if you want something more one-on-one. But the group coaching is fun. It's really interesting, because we're talking relationships,
Right.
and in a group. So it's very fascinating. It's such fun. Like a double dynamic, right?
That's awesome. Well, and it's so useful sometimes to hear other people's stories, because when you're like, oh, they do that in that relationship, that's a struggle. It's sometimes easier to identify ourselves in someone else's story than to be so brutally honest with ourselves in our own stories sometimes. So I like that about the group kind of experience, is you can be fully present, take away tons of value, but the spotlight is not always directly on you. You're able to absorb some things sometimes from what's going on with others.
Yeah, it's a great source of insight actually to watch someone else being coached, because what they're being coached on might not be something that you are kind of triggered on in that moment, but you will see what she's doing to get herself into that space. You'll
Yeah.
be able to start unpacking it. And that ability to watch somebody unpack their own brain
Yeah.
helps you to do it yourself. Because when you're coaching, like when we're in a coaching conversation, you're in it, right? You're
Mhm.
in the narrative, you're in the story, you're in the emotional experience. And that's, and yet watching it from the outside is very fascinating. So there's a huge learning for people to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I'm so excited for it. I can't believe that it starts in 2 days. It's
I
amazing.
know. It's so exciting. And really, just before the holiday season, I think couldn't be a better time, you know? Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it gives us a chance to, as these kind of social interactions amp up and we're around people that maybe we don't get to see too often just because of distance or busyness, gives a lot of fodder to
You know, I'm
examine.
just thinking, I saw something on the BBC today, an article on the BBC about it's becoming a common trend to kind of disown your parents
I saw the
because
same article.
yeah,
Yes.
they see it. And I was like, no, no, don't do that. Have coaching first.
Yeah. There was a term for it. They said
Saw
it used
that.
to be called parental divorce, but now it has a different
Yes.
term. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very. It's unfortunate, but we talked yesterday about how it just seems like the modern, I don't know, ebbs and flows of information, energy. It's like they're pushing us to just move away from anybody that disagrees, that isn't perfect, that maybe has political opinions or some issues that maybe we really deeply disagree with. And I think what's interesting about what you're saying is, um, as long as we're not in physical bodily harm's way, if these are people in our family that are going to be around, that there are different ways of dealing with those things than just cutting people off that can be a lot more fulfilling in the long term. And we don't have to be comfortable in every moment with every person if they disagree with some things that we say or we disagree with them. I think it's a radically different kind of model than maybe you hear for the most part out there.
Yeah, and I think it's a worrying trend, right? Because as the world becomes more of a global village, we should be getting better at embracing our differences, not
Yeah,
cutting out people that we don't agree with, right? Because conflict is going to happen the minute you meet someone who's different to you, including your own love partner.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we should be learning how to be better and being uncomfortable in relationships and being around people that we don't like or that don't fit our mold.
Sure.
And if we can be comfortable in those relationships, then for me, then it's much more exciting to think about us as a global village, that we can get on with anybody and we can come to closer understandings with each other. We can create the clarity that's going on in the misunderstandings so that we
Mhm.
do actually start creating a world where there's space for all of us. But we
Right.
start shutting people down, boxing people, feeling that we're better than people. That's very
Mhm.
contemptuous, you know.
Yeah. Right.
We
Yeah.
stop the conversations, and the minute the conversations stop, the conflict escalates.
Isn't that
And
interesting?
then where are we really, you know?
Yeah. That's very interesting.
So on a,
Um,
your family is on a small scale, but it's like the world in one place. You're going to have all kinds in your family. And
mhm.
so those people are going to be there all over the world. And you can't just cut people out of the world. They're there and they are influencers, they are voters, they are people, they are people with a say. So the
Yeah.
more we talk, the better, and living in Africa, that's the best proof, right?
Yeah.
Like if we weren't able to talk and we weren't able to de-escalate conflict the way that we are in this part of the world, we'd be in a much more difficult place.
Yeah, it's true.
Is
I said yesterday I love how you use this word lightness about the relationships, and what I hear today is also openness, curiosity, tolerance, respect, because that's what keeps the communication open, whether it's in a family, whether it's in communities, like you're saying, people groups who tend to put themselves against kind of others by ideology or whatever the thing may be. I like that. I like those words: openness, curiosity, respect, tolerance. Yeah.
Because we all want to, I mean, if you think of the word curiosity, it's such a lovely word, isn't it? I mean, that just implies that we've got our eyes open to the world and the world is delighting us. You know, so if you could drop into that, I'm experimenting with what I'm seeing, you know, being curious about what's going on in our family, being really curious about what's going on in ourselves. It then just changes your dynamic and the way you already are showing up in that relationship. You know, and I was just thinking as you were talking, this is such an interesting meditation, and you might have done it, the loving kindness metta. So in the loving kindness meditation, you know, you start with yourself and you wish yourself well. And then you wish someone that you extend it out to someone within your really close circle that you adore. So like your child or your dog. And then you extend it further out and further out until you are trying to generate a feeling of compassion for the whole of that continent. And it's so fascinating, like, to watch where you stop being able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, because along in that pathway, something will get stuck somewhere. Like if you have to, let's say, think of your mother-in-law and extend love to your mother-in-law, and you just go shut down. And so that's, be curious. That's so interesting. What's going on there?
Yeah.
You know, that's a great sign to tell you that there's one of these four is somewhere in that relationship. And that just by you showing up a little bit differently and applying one of these little tips, you can start to shift that and lighten it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I do. When you called it loving kindness meditation, I thought, oh, I haven't done that. But when you described it, I realized I have. It's Vishen Lakhiani, the founder of Mind Valley, has a beautiful meditation that he created called the 6-phase meditation. Each one of the phases has a different purpose, and literally the very first phase is exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
So without him, he calls it a compassion meditation, but
yes, yeah, because
he must have based it on the loving kindness practice, because I know that's
kindness. Well, loving kindness is a word of it. It is a word used to describe compassion in the Buddhist tradition. So the translation of compassion is basically loving kindness.
Okay.
Because if you think of what does loving kindness feel like inside, yeah,
that's nice. Yeah. Oh, good.
So that's one way of looking. But you know, for all of you who are in hot conflict at the moment, you know, me talking about loving kindness meditation is not helpful.
Well, it's helpful to know that it exists, and maybe those are the things that we're aiming for, right? That we want to move towards, and certainly with the support, like of the program that's coming up, this 8-week program, that's something people will absolutely move closer to, which will be exciting.
Well, it's a good sign if you do that meditation and you get stuck. It's a great place. Even if you're thinking like, oh, all my relationships are fine, I'm like sorted, do it and see where you get stuck. There'll be something delicious there to go and explore, you know.
Awesome. All right, Julia, I think we should wind up where we went long today because there was so much good stuff to talk about. But just to remind anybody that's listening, if you found this helpful, you feel like this series of 4 talks around these 4 toxic behaviors that really create and escalate conflict in relationships has been helpful. We have an 8-week group coaching program that Julia is leading, starting on Wednesday, December 8th. You can find that link to that in my bio. And Julia is also offering a free call in case you want to just ask some questions about what does this program look like? Is it right for you? You can find that link on her website, which is, do you want to say it again?
Happiness-Matters.coach.
Yeah, good. That'll be great. So we hope to see you there. Hope you've enjoyed these talks. It's been a really fun series to do with you, Julia. Thank you for doing this with me. It was fun. I know I learned a lot. That's the best part of my job, is I get to learn from
that is a great part of your job.
Yeah, the other incredible coaches kind of within Love and Rebellion, because everyone has such incredible things to offer. So thank you for enlightening me and inspiring me as well. And I can't wait to get through this group coaching program. It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So look forward to it. And also just to thank everybody for listening to all these calls
Yeah.
and to Jamie and I chatting. Jamie and I, it's an excuse for Jamie and I to chat anyway. So yeah.
Yes. Sounds good. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you in the program and leave some comments what you took away from this video. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you later. See you, Julia. See you, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.